So, wow, we're on chapter 11 in your government book, and we're now going to talk about state and local government, totally different from the federal government, and how state and local government react with the federal government or with the central government. So it says here, Justice Chase in Texas versus White in 1869 says, the Constitution in all of its provisions looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states. Indestructible union, indestructible states, both equal. And Alex de Tocqueville says, local institutions constitute the strength of free nation. And our local government is very important. In the past, it was even more important than it is today. So we have some highlights we're going to go over here. 50 individual states, state executive officers onto state legislators and state courts. And then we're going to do a couple sections on the local government and financing the state and local governments. So let's begin. 50 individual states. First of all, 50 individual states, they each have their own constitution. Just like our federal government, our central government has the Constitution of the United States. Each state has a constitution. Both government and states, of course, have had these constitutions, from the beginning. Of course, the Constitution of the United States was 1789, but some of these constitutions of especially the 13 states were even before then. So what is a constitution? A constitution is a written plan which sets up a form of government and established its basic governing principles. So make sure you know, it's a written plan setting up a government and establishing basic principles. So the American form of government from Article 4 guarantees the states to have a Republican form of government. To every state in the Union is guaranteed a Republican form of government. What is a Republican form of government? It has two features of a Republican form of government. One is to rule by law under a constitution. A constitution sets the perimeters, sets the law to constitution, so it's a Republican constitution. And a Republican form of government basically rules by representation. They send representatives of the population for them to stand for them. So Republican means representation. Representation that we elect the senators, we elect the House, that represents us, right? And then, of course, we have a constitution to set our rules. So two things, a constitution, rule by law, and a representation, rule by a republic rule by representation. Federal and states hold basic principles. So basic principles of both of our federal and state say popular sovereignty. So what is popular sovereignty when you talk of popular sovereignty? Well, we talk about popular sovereignty, you basically are saying that the government has the ability to elect their representatives and have part in amending and revising their constitutions. So popular means that basically the people, popular means people, are actually in charge. They're electing the representatives and they are having a part in amending the Constitution both. That's popular sovereignty, both in our federal government and our state government. Also, there's a limited government because of the checks and balances which allow each branch of the government to have authority over the other three branches. The other two branches. There's three branches, and we know that. The executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The executive branch carries or executes the laws. The legislative branch makes the laws. And then, of course, the judicial branch says that the laws are constitutional or not. So, and they check and balance, just like they do In the Constitution of the United States of America, the state constitutions do the same thing. But there are big differences between the United States Constitution and the state constitution. So what are the differences? Well, the United States Constitution is short and it's hardly ever amended. We have 27 amendments over the few hundred years, right? And also it's very general in scope. The state constitutions are very long, very lengthy, and they're often amended many, many times, and they're very specific in scope. They're very specific in dealing with the people. So just know, state constitutions are long. They amended sometimes, many, many times amended, and they're very specific. And our U.S. Constitution is pretty short comparatively and rarely amended, general in scope. Remember this part here, the difference between United States and state constitution. The state constitution serves as a fundamental law of the state. So it takes precedent over state or local law. So basically the state's fundamental laws, they take precedent over the local cities. So say a city has a law and then the state makes a law on that same subject, the state has a precedent or is over the local laws. So the same now. A precedent would be that would be stated if the government, the central government has basically that precedent over the state laws too. So the state laws must not conflict with the United States Constitution or any federal laws. If they do, then of course those laws that the state put are not in effect. So the United States Constitution has precedent over the state, as I said before. So let's talk about some of these early state constitutions. So in May of 1776, that's, before the Declaration of Independence, right? May of 1776. The Second Continental Congress advised to establish colonies, and these colonies to establish constitutions. So such governments shall, they said right here, such governments as shall, in the opinion of the representatives of the people, best conduce to happiness and safety of their constituents in particular, and America in general. So they set forth and advised the colonies to establish governments with constitutions in the opinion of the representatives of the people. They were Republicans, right? They would have Republican governments best to the happiness and safety of their people in particular, is what it means. So the majority of states adopted constitutions in 1776 to 1777. Most of them used the models that they already had. So what kind of models did they already have? The models that they had, first of all, the oldest, the Massachusetts Constitution was adopted in 1780, but it is the oldest written constitution now in force anywhere in the world. In 1780, Massachusetts was the first constitution. A lot of these constitutions came from basically the royal charters, and some of them had already had the framework of a constitution. But a test question is, Massachusetts Constitution is the oldest written constitution now in force anywhere in the world. So in most of the original states, people were given no direct voice. Constitutions were ratified in the legislature or the state convention, and they were elected by representatives who drew up proposed constitutions and presented it to the voters for ratification. So in most states, let's think, well, in most states, what did they do? The people didn't have a direct voice, but the constitutions were ratified in the legislature that was representing them. and they elected these representatives to do the work. So Massachusetts was followed by other states. Again, Massachusetts was in the lead, and the new states revised or adopted their new constitution, and the people then were given a direct voice. So basically, in Massachusetts, the territories sought statehood, including Massachusetts, and the Congress required the constitutions by popular elected conventions. So an example by Massachusetts has been followed by other states. It says here where Massachusetts basically had a convention. They gathered the people for a convention, and then they basically put together their constitution, which was then approved by the people. So basically, that's kind of what from Massachusetts, other states did the same. So Massachusetts, again, in the leading, had the oldest written constitution, and the first to have conventions of the people gathering, and then having the people approve by voting on these constitutions. So that was, again, Massachusetts. So let's go on here. Current state constitutions. So current state constitutions, half of the state constitutions are over 100 years old. Half of them. But they've changed numerous times. Like state constitutions seem to change a lot. Many have adopted new constitutions to replace their old constitutions. In fact, the state of Louisiana has adopted a total of 11 constitutions. They've had 11 different constitutions in Louisiana since it entered the Union in 1812. 11. Well, most of these state constitutions can be divided into these areas, and we're going to go over these areas. These are something you probably need to know. So they're divided into, first of all, what does the Constitution have? It has a preamble. What's a preamble? A preamble is a short introduction statement telling why the Constitution is written. So it has a preamble, just an introduction. And then the next, it has attached a Bill of Rights, just like the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution. And these Bill of Rights are provisions listing basic rights of the people and limiting the power of government. And similar to our Bill of Rights that we know of on our Constitution, which we went over. From that point, they have a description of the state government, providing for 3 branches of government, just like the federal, three separate branches of state government, 3 branches being the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and each with a list of the office and the terms in office and qualifications and duties of these powers. So that's a description of the state government. Then they have a description of local governments. When you think of local government, you think of your city and towns, right? So they provide for local subdivisions of the state governments, which are counties and townships and such. And they include the powers of the local government and responsibilities that these local governments have. So a description of the state government, then a description of the local government. Then general provisions dealing with voting, qualifications, elections, collection of taxes, of course, appropriation of funds, what they're going to do with taxes, education, and various other aspects of state government. On to the last part, which is the provisions for change. So they say how you can amend this Constitution or change it. How can it be revised? How can it be amended? And many of these state constitutions were amended many times and revised many times. And we're going to find out how they do that in a bit. So changing state constitutions. So how do we change state constitutions? Here's a picture. This is a many state capitals. Here's the capital of Missouri State Capitol on the left there that resemble they all kind of resemble the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. But some of them have more contemporary designs here. Here's the state capital of Hawaii. Doesn't look like that, does it? In fact, you wouldn't even know it was a state capital. So those are basically our state capital, where actually where our government presides. Their state government presides in the state capital. So changing state constitutions. So there's a means of changing, and this means goes by two different ways. First of all, there's as a revision, and a revision is always a major change. They're going to majorly change their constitution. And a minor change is usually called an amendment. So a revision means a total revision of the whole Constitution, right? And an amendment means you're going to amend one little thing on the Constitution. Just know those two differences. So we'll go over this later there. So what a revision? Let's talk about a revision. So the most traditional method for revising a Constitution or adopting a new one is a revision. Today there have been, up to this date, there have been 230 such conventions that have gone into revising or revision of their constitution. So 230 revisions. That's a lot. So the legislation of every state holds the power to call for a constitutional convention. But in most states, it must seek approval for the voters. But in some states, the Constitution requires that a question of calling a convention be submitted to voters at regular intervals. So basically saying, okay, do the voters want us to have a revision of our Constitution? So looking to the voters to seek approval after it's revised. So, and ordinarily, the Constitution Convention process involves 3 elections, and here's how it goes. So let's look how it goes here. 3 elections. This is to revise the Constitution. They'll have 3 elections. First of all, the voters approve the calling of the convention. They say, okay, we're going to call a convention to revise. So they vote, yes, we want that. Then the voters elect delegates to the convention, which politicians or such are which state delegates are going to go to the convention to represent us. So another vote. And then the convention delegates revise the old Constitution and as they propose a new one. So that's the work they do. So, and then the voters have to ratify or reject the new revised Constitution. 3 votes. The voters approve for the convention to call a convention to revise it. The voters elect delegates to be at the convention. And then the delegates do all the revising and do everything. And then the voters ratify or reject the revised Constitution. 3 votes for a revision. So that's a major deal. The voters getting out 3 times. So now that's revision. That's when you have a big change. The next, when you have amendments, amendments are state constitutions that have just a minor change. But there's still 3 methods of proposing constitutional amendments, 3 different methods. There's the convention proposal, similar to the revision. There's the legislative proposal, where basically the lawyers or those in the Senate, in the House or whatever, they're getting together to make these laws, just like they do in our federal government. And then there's the initiative proposal. This is very interesting, that initiative proposal. So let's find out a little bit more about these 3 things, how to amend. So, first of all, the convention proposal is seldom used today. That's that whole revision when they have to vote 3 times and such, and they come to a convention, similar to that. Then there's the legislative proposal, which is the most common. And the legislative proposal is used to basically make amendments in our, like I said before, in our government, in our United States Constitution. But the initiative proposal is used. And a few states limit the number of amendments that are presented at one time. And the details of the initiative proposal differs from state and varies from state to state. 18 states are proposed by voters. So 18 states, the constitutional amendment. So 18, let's look at that. I don't know exactly what they're talking about here, but let's read it over. In 18 states, the voters may propose constitutional amendments. The process by which they propose an amendment is called initiative. So when, in these 18 states, when they come and they propose an amendment, they call this initiative. So when you go vote, sometimes you'll be voting for a prop, call it prop, like prop with a number, and then or initiative, because the citizens initiate the amendment. The initiative process differs from state to state, but it generally involves getting a required number of citizens to sign a petition. So you'll go and first of all sign a petition. You sign this petition that you're supporting a certain amendment to the Constitution. There are a certain amendment. And if the required number of signatures are obtained on your petition, the proposal is placed on the ballot for approval or rejection by the voters. So when you go to vote, you'll be voting on certain initiatives. So basically, someone has got together a petition to support some amendment, some change to the Constitution of the state, or presenting this initiative, and then put it on our ballots so that we can vote and approve it or reject it. You see that. When you vote, you'll see that. So regardless of how a constitutional amendment is proposed, it must be ratified before it becomes an official amendment. So in every state except Delaware, all proposed amendments must be ratified by popular vote, people voting on it. So an election in which the voters of the state approve or reject a proposed amendment is called a referendum. A referendum means referred. Basically just means it's referred to the people now. So once an amendment has been properly proposed and ratified, then it will become part of our state constitution on each state, that state constitution. So just remember, initiative. Initiative is when a citizen comes and gets a petition and has enough people signing it to get it in so that people can vote on it, and through the voting they can approve or reject. And a referendum is an election in which the voters of the state approve or reject this proposed amendment, and this is called referendum, referred to the people. So where the voters then can reject or approve this referendum. So initiative, and referendums. So let's go on to the functions of state governments. So how do the state governments function? So let's find out more about that. So the traditional position is the original states, of course, they existed before the permanent national government did. So original states were actually running their states before the United States of America, before our Constitution in America. So in 1776, the Declaration of Independence put forth 13 separate sovereign states. We know that. And the United States Constitution came under the federal system, and the states then were delegated certain powers to the government. Now, they did not specifically list the powers of the state in the Constitution, but it was clear that the states retained all but a few specific powers. So, to settle matters, they put forth what is called the 10th Amendment, right? And here's the 10th Amendment. Here's a picture. Here's the 10th Amendment. It's basically saying the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's written in the Constitution. So what is the 10th Amendment? It basically gives power to the states. Anything, any power that's not given to the United States Constitution and is not prohibited by the states are reserved. So we call these reserved powers. So the states have all the reserved powers. So the states should be a lot more powerful than the central government, but today is not. Basically, the central government has negated a lot of these reserved powers that were given to the states. So clearly, as we see, after the matter was settled with the 10th Amendment, would remove any question about the source of power in the federal system should be the states. But clearly, this power flow should be from states to government, not from the government, the central government, to the states. But for some reason, it's got backwards today. So the states should be telling our central government what to do, not our central government telling the states. So the states at work. So what do the states do? Well, there's about 5 things mentioned here. Actually, there's 6 things mentioned here. First, the states, they protect public health, safety, and morals. All these things. Then that's number 1. They have to do with public health and safety. On to regulating marriage and divorce. The states do that. Number 3, operating motor vehicles, the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles in each state. Promoting education, public education in the states. Number 5, important controls over business, like chartering corporations and licensing businesses and regulating business practices, all under the control of business by the state. The most important function, number 6, the most important function of the state is law enforcement. The state governor depends on the state and local police, and also game wardens and law enforcement officials are all under the state, right? So basically, states do a lot of things, as we see here. Growing federal authority, though. It says in recent years, basically, a lot of the state power of these traditional duties have been lost. How have they been lost? 2 factors, 2 reasons that the federal government has taken over the states. One is by court rulings. The Supreme Court has decided to rule on certain aspects of the state. And when the Supreme Court rules, which is really, really pretty, I should say, politically not good. Why? Because the Supreme Court has not been basically voted. We don't vote for judges. The judges of the Supreme Court have been picked by the president and legislated. So now we have these judges ruling court rulings that rule the states. Not a good thing. Now, that's one thing, those court rulings. And the other is, number 2, the states now have grown very increasingly dependent on federal money, federal funds, federal grants. So the states, in order to get their money from the government, from the federal government, they have to do what the federal government tells them to do, right? Have to go by the rules and regulations of the grants that the states get. And the money comes in to the government through the IRS. We pay our taxes to the federal government, and then these grants will go to the states, but the states have to do exactly what the rules and regulations are the grant to get that money. And this makes the states just, needing those grants, they'll do what the federal government tells them to do. So what are the 2 things? Number 1, the court rulings of the Supreme Court. Number 2, the federal grants given to the states control them. Those are 2 controls of the state. The growing state authority. Some responsibilities have been taken by state and local government, and a lot of these responsibilities come under social welfare. Social welfare. So now under social welfare, they have a bigger share of their state taxes. So from the citizens. The taxes come from the citizens, and then they go to welfare cases in the state. And now we have a lot of states really doing a lot of social welfare in their state from state money. And so and a lot of times this has gone to state instead of local authorities. They take them from some cities and use them in others, right? And some state governments, as the federal government do, they have become very, very very much of a bureaucracy, very bureaucratic. So what does that mean? Is that they have had a lot of heads, right? They have to go through a lot of complicated paperwork, I should say. Complicated, and some very wasteful, and some bureaucracies are very threatening. The states have this now, state bureaucracies just similar to our government bureaucracies in the central government. So, and historians summed up the situation as it stood by in the 1970s, and here's what he said. Federalism was by no means defunct in form, for state and local governments were performing more functions, spending more money, and hiring more employees than ever before, but they had lost their relative independence and could no longer serve as preservers of traditional values and local preferences. So basically saying federalism at the state and local governments now is performing functions and spending money, and a lot of this is for social welfare. So this is kind of introduction to our state government. Let's go over the section review. He answered some of these questions here. What is the Constitution? Well, we have that written down, don't we? A written plan which sets up a form of government and establishes basic governing principles. Constitution. What does Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution guarantee every state? It guarantees every state a republican form of government. Which state constitution is the oldest written constitution in force today? Massachusetts. Massachusetts Constitution. In fact, anywhere in the world. Number 4, name the state which set up a precedent by allowing the people to vote to ratify their constitution. Again, that's Massachusetts. Number 5, what do we call a major change to a constitution? A major change is called a revision. Revision to the total revision to the revision means you have a vision to the Constitution and you're going to redo it. Redo the whole thing. A minor change is amendment. We're just going to change something minor in the Constitution. It's called an amendment. Number 6, briefly describe how amendments to state constitutions are proposed and ratified. Well, they're basically, there's 3 methods. There's the convention proposal. They set up a convention and the voters actually vote 3 times. And then on to the legislative proposal. And that's the most common, and that's when basically the Congress of the state, which, they vote on proposed bills and bring forth legislation. And then there's the initiative proposal, and that's when a citizen initiates by a petition, people sign a petition and brings forth a proposal to be voted on. And these must be ratified by the popular vote, that means voted on. And referendum means that referring it to the people, right? So, number 7, name a few important functions of the state governments. Well, important functions are to protect health and safety, regulate marriage and divorce, regulate our motor vehicles, DMV, right? Promote education, control over businesses, business license and charters, and most important, our law enforcement, our police. So that's all that's pretty important. So let's go back to James Madison here, this focus. James Madison, I'm just going to go over this. You can read it over yourself, and it's pretty interesting. But James Madison basically said, if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal control would be necessary. So he's saying men are not angels. And then he went on to say a federal system imposes limits on political power, that he wants power limited because men are not angels. And he's basically said that the federal system of the states makes it easy to vote, because if you don't like it in that state, then you can just move your feet and move on to a different state, and maybe you'll like their government better. So if you don't like Massachusetts, go to New Hampshire. The different government will control each other. Socially broken into so many parts and interested in classes, the rights of the minority are in little danger. Basically said there's so many parts, so many classes and different types of individuals that now even the minorities are in little danger of being taken over, which he was right. Madison was right. Dividing the political authority is essential to preserving the rights of individuals. The authority needs to be divided. It says, unfortunately, the United States has drifted far from these federal roots, though. Washington finds decentralization very distasteful. They don't like dealing with the states. And the federal bureaucracy these grants given them will bribe the states to capitulate. Basically, they're giving the money to the states, giving them grants so that the states will obey them, right? So, in fact, this sometimes brings very ominous things like racketeering and conspiracies and all kinds of things, because people can get really politically ambitious. And basically, prosecutors are to expand, and the jurisdictions beyond the constitutional limits. So political ambition, political ambitious people want to bring in jurisdictions beyond what the Constitution really says. Plus, they're unaccountable. They're unaccountable in many ways because they have these regulatory agencies that are not accountable to anyone. So with the regulatory agencies just telling people what to do and not accountable, and then these political ambitious that go beyond the constitutional limits. Two things: beyond the constitutional limits and regulatory agencies regulating, not being accountable to the government. So Washington creates laws or regulations that can't possibly be handled by the nations, by the nationwide planning at all. So basically, this problem turns to crisis. Why? Because now our nation wants to handle things like energy, education, central banking, agriculture, postal service, housing, healthcare. Pretty soon, the bureaucracy of our government wants to handle everything, right? So it's going from the states being controlled to the central government having the main control. It says here you can't fight City Hall, but you must fight City Hall because you can't fight the central government. So it's better to try to fight your City Hall and those laws that are coming through in your city and in your state, because it's going to be very hard when a government takes control of them. The central government takes control. Many turn to private provisions. Many are saying, okay, we're not going to have public school. Let's go to private school. Let's get more private things because of the control of the government. Private business basically lots more amendable things than the government will. It's hard to change the central government. Robert Bork says the limitations of power to preserve the authority to the states have guaranteed our liberties as much as the Bill of Rights itself. The world is now groping to rediscover federalism. As a cradle, the United States should lead, not follow. But what he's saying, We need to go to federalism. We need to support, support the states and have most of the powers come from the local and state than the central government. And that's exactly what James Madison thought in the beginning, and the way the Constitution was set up, for the states to have more power than the federal government.